In this episode, I visit with Hollywood producer Larry Kasanoff on his book, A Touch of the Madness.
And I'm thrilled today to have with me Larry Kasanoff. Larry is not a compliance officer. He is in a very different profession than me and most of the listeners, but I think you're going to learn quite a bit and you're going to have a ton of fun. Larry, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Thanks, Tom. It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So why don't you start off and tell us what you do now, Larry?
I'm a film producer. I make movies like Mortal Kombat. I made Terminator 2. I made Dirty Dancing. I made True Lies. I made Lego Star Wars, things like that.
I was intrigued to read your academic background. So could you tell us about that? And I wanted to ask, did it have anything to do with your profession as a producer?
Here's the deal. So I wanted to be a movie producer since I was a little kid. I had wonderful parents in Boston, but who knew nothing about the movie business, had no money or no connections. And when my dad took me to a James Bond movie when I was like 10, and I left saying, I want to be that guy, James Bond. But who's the guy that says Cubby Broccoli Presents, produced by? What's that guy do? And as soon as I heard, that was it. So in Boston, I had no idea how I was going to do it. So I started plotting when I was 10. And I realized if I got into good schools, I could meet people. And so in Boston is the oldest high school in the country called Boston Latin School. Benjamin Franklin went to it. That it's an unusual school because it's like a private school, but if you do well on a test, you can go for free. So starting out in grammar school, I'm like, I'm going to Boston Latin School, which I did. I got in. It was like going to school in the 1800s. It was terrible, but you do get into good schools. And then I went to Cornell, and then I got an MBA from Wharton, and I did it. And the entire way along, I got as many internships and as many people as I can, which actually worked because my last internship was at HBO, the summer between my 2 years at Wharton. And I got an internship in the film programming department. And from that, met someone a great entrepreneur who had left HBO to start a new independent film studio where I got a great job out of school. So the strategy worked. So that's why I went to those schools. But yeah, to answer your question, it was a good education. And the thought process of having an MBA and it has really helped a lot. It's just a good analytical way of thinking that I use all the time.
I was going to ask, does that structured thinking meld with what you bring or you suggest as a creative process?
I think it does because the structured thinking, it's not so much structured thinking as, okay, what's the problem and how are we going to solve it? And I would say being a film producer that pretty much describes what being a film producer is. Every day there's 100 problems and how are you going to solve it? How are you going to solve it? How are you going to solve it? And certainly in business school, where the way I went, it was case studies. So you've got a case. Here's the problem of this company has, and it's a real company. It's a real problem. And you get on Monday morning, and that's your assignment that week. And you do that 5 classes a semester for 2 years every day. So the process of solving a problem is good, except I certainly applied it to things that was not really the stuff of Wharton. I wasn't applying it to the next Procter & Gamble marketing thing. I'm applying it to how we're going to shoot this film in this country on time when it's raining out. But the process is the same. And I think you can meld the two really well. And I think you can meld creativity and business really well. And honestly, as much as I'm all for, in the book I wrote, it's all about being wildly creative. You can't really make a creative decision without making a business decision because then you got to figure out how to do it.
That sounds to me suspiciously like risk management, but I'll save that for a moment.
But there's one other thing I got to add. The other thing that Cornell had, but certainly Wharton had, which was unbelievable in the days I went, was every day at 4:00, they were sort of presentations by companies. They would send their top executives and a cocktail party because they were recruiting, not me. They were recruiting people who wanted to be in marketing, investment banking. So I got so much practice in meeting people and meeting famous people and CEOs. I got so comfortable with it. I learned through my college experience how to do something that I think is wildly important to what I do, to what anybody in the creative world has to do, which is simply ask. I think one of the easiest and best things you can do is ask anybody anything, anytime you want, for anything you want, and never stop until you get a yes. And I learned that, in school.
And I was really intrigued by that comment because what I wanted to ask, is it simply persistence, or are you able to persuade the listener through your asking why it is in their interest to get them to yes?
I think it's both. Yeah, I don't think you randomly call anybody in the world and just say, want to have coffee with me. So we did an animated movie about 2 years ago called Bobbleheads, about creatures whose head bobble, and with Universal. And we wanted Cher to be in it. So we called Cher, we called her manager and asked, and Cher did the movie. And she was great. It was her image too. It wasn't just her voice. It was Bobblehead Cher. and she was fantastic. And when the movie came out, People magazine said to her, "You've never done an animated movie. Why did you say yes to this one?" And she said, "I never did an animated movie because no one ever asked me." So can you imagine that Cher, arguably the most iconic woman on the planet, is sitting there and no one ever called to ask until I did. So imagine in your life, who's ever listening, that you think, oh, I should call this person for whatever you want, but I don't know. They must get a million phone calls. They must get a million, maybe not. So call and ask. And so certainly the part appealed to Cher, and we tailored the part for what she wanted. But it was an ask that no one ever thought to do before me, which in one sense is mind-boggling. But on the other hand, I think happens all the time.
Many of the listeners to this podcast, indeed most of them, are corporate types. So I was really intrigued by your thoughts on your creative process, where you say you have to embrace your crazy side. Now that I understand your academic background, it makes a lot more sense to me to understand that you can wed both a business analytical framework with that creative side or crazy side. But how would you say that?
See, I think that the current of the river of life pulls all of us towards the middle all the time, every second, sleeping, driving, your mother, sister, brother, husband, whatever, you can't do this, it won't work. And that current is okay in a sense if you don't mind being in the middle. But if you are in the corporate world and you wind up in the middle for your company, you're going to get eclipsed by people who aren't in the middle, because your audience wants the new and the different. They don't want the middle. And so the best way you have to swim against that current, the best tool, is with innovation and creativity. And the best way to get innovative and creative is what I call the touch of the madness. It means you have to give into that unbridled, crazy, creative side to do something truly unusual in order to get out of the middle. And otherwise, so corporately, it makes incredible amount of sense to think, if I just do what everyone else does, my company's eventually going to go down and someone else will eclipse me. So I need a touch of the madness to be really innovative and get out of that.
In my perception of the movie business is you are graded with a very clear metric. Do people buy a ticket to go see your movie? In the corporate world, we call that engagement. So how do you meld that thought around engagement to corporations or others who tend to be a little more conservative than people like yourself?
First of all, you'd be surprised how conservative the movie business really is. It's very hard to get people to think out of the box. When I made Mortal Kombat, it was, no one had ever made a hit movie from a video game. People told me I was crazy, I was going to lose my career. That happens a lot. So even in this world, it's not as openly, wildly creative as you think. You still have to push for it. I think all of them are. I think there's a few things. I think corporately, if you understand your audience and who they are and what they want, and you really understand what your audience wants, and then you're really prepared to give them what they want, all of a sudden those crazy creative ideas seem a little bit more practical and a little bit more not so creative, not so unusual. It's the notion, I always tell people who work for us, that you don't work for me, you don't work for the director, you don't work for the studio, you work for the audience. And I think corporate speak, that's you work for the customer. So if you're really speaking to your board of directors or whoever from the point of view of what the customer wants, and you think of it that way, you analyze it that way, and then you don't give up on it that way, I think it works for anybody. It works for governments, it works for companies, it works for anybody. I have a few plans, a few suggestions of how to do it in the book, but I think you gotta just understand your customer and ask, what do they want, and do we have the guts to give it to them?
When the first Sony versions of Spider-Man came out, I can remember my aunt telling me, who at that point was in her early 80s, Tom, the reason these are good movies is they were great stories as comic books. And it strikes me that Mortal Kombat was a great story. And so I'd like to maybe ask you about the requirements or the uses of having a great story or storytelling, which you translate into a visual movie.
So I call that the essence of your idea more than a story. So the secret is when people said to me, you're going to lose your career by making a movie out of a video game, is I never thought I was making a movie out of a video game. I thought I was making a movie out of the essence of what made that video game great. So imagine that any idea or story, intellectual property, is a pyramid. And we think on the top of the pyramid, in Mortal Kombat's case, would be the video game. No, it's one down one side of the pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is the essence. Why is that video game successful? And the essence I always thought of Mortal Kombat was empowerment. Martial arts teaches that if you're not the biggest kid on the block, if you train and do the right thing, you can still win. So if you take that essence of Mortal Kombat and say, that's the top of my period. And they already made a video game. Now I can go back to the top and I can go down one side of the period and make a movie out of it. And then I go back down the other side and make an animated series, and another side and make the TV show. We're now in our 20th Mortal Kombat production in something like 20 years doing that. So I think the answer to the question is, if you understand the essence of what you're doing, and there was no story, by the way, when we got Mortal Kombat, we then backed up to the essence of it and we wrote a story, and that became a good story, but it wasn't there right away. So you're right, you have to have a good story, but it's really the essence of what's going on in the movie. When we did Dirty Dancing, I was 2 minutes into the business, and I made what would have been a horrible mistake when I was head of production, and the real genius behind Dirty Dancing is a guy named Jimmy Einer, who is still my partner in my business today. And the first thing Jimmy ever said to me when I said who he wanted to cast in the movie, Jennifer Grey is a great actress, but I said, she's not the most famous actress right now in Hollywood, and she's not the most glamorous actress right now in Hollywood. And he said, you idiot, first words he ever said to me, you idiot, she's the most liked. And that means everyone in the world is going to identify with her and think, if she got a guy like Patrick Swayze, I can get a guy like Patrick Swayze. And he was 100% correct. So that's knowing the essence of your story and why people will like it and programming accordingly. That same decision-making process you can make in a movie, you can make in a company, you can make in a consumer products company, you can make anywhere. It's understanding the essence of your property, which you call a story, which it becomes the story, but that story better incorporate the essence of that. Dirty Dancing's a fantasy. The normal girl is going to get the bad boy prince who's going to become a good boy for me. That's the fantasy. That's the essence of that story. And it worked.
Let me turn to A Touch of Madness and start off. Why did you write that book, and who's the target market for it?
So I wrote the book because I feel, especially now today, and this maybe touches a little bit on what you guys talk about a lot, especially today, people are very scared to be their most creative self. And I see that more and more over the last few years. And so I wrote the book to try and encourage anybody, really, a corporate brand manager from a 22-year-old starting out who wants to write a story, to encourage them to absolutely be their most creative self. And I'll tell you how I got to it. When I was at my first job out of school, where I took a chance on this new company that the guy who had been in HBO, was from a company called Vestron, which was a new independent film studio. And I got an incredible job, really young, running the production. And Vestron in those days, as home video was taking off, was like streaming today. So streaming started, they have all these new streamers that need programming. In home video in those days, you had all these video stores that needed movies on their shelf. So my first job was to make 80 movies a year, 80. Buy them, make them, co-produce them. We don't care. If you lose money, you got a big problem. So I made low-budget horror movies and rom-coms and action movies and things like that. And then we got a script for a movie called Platoon. And Platoon was not one of these movies. It was a very serious script about the Vietnam War and the effects it had on kids. The people who were going to be cast in it are now stars, but they weren't then. Oliver Stone, the genius director, we'd done another movie with him before, which was good, but it didn't work. But I really wanted to do it. And I fought for it. And my boss, to his credit, said, hey, you're the head of production. You can do it. But there's always a but. If it fails, you're fired. You want to bet your job, kid. And so I said, I didn't get into the movie business to play it safe. So I greenlit the movie. And I'm the only person to giggle their way through the first screening of Platoon, not because it wasn't amazing, but because it was. And I said, oh my God, I'm not getting fired. And it was so good, it won Best Picture at the Academy Awards that year. A few months later, I ran into the director at a bar in New York one night, and he bought me a drink, and he said, kid, I always liked you. You have a touch of the madness. And I thought, a touch of the madness? Is he calling me crazy? Is he saying I'm a little bit, am I crazy? And then I thought about it for a minute. I thought, Oliver had a touch of the madness by making a Vietnam movie the way only he would. My boss had a touch of the madness by letting a 25-year-old kid with no prior experience run an 80-picture film slate. And I had a touch of the madness by betting my job on it. And that's when it occurred to me what I've been saying, that this is what you need. And without taking a shot like that, which only would happen in a company where a kid like me was running a company for an incredibly disruptive entrepreneur, would it happen? And that became Platoon.
So
That's what I think.
that risk, though, had to be the risk you took and were willing to take had to be based on something. Was it a gut feeling? Was it analysis of a great script? Was it confidence in a director? Was the story that great? What gave you the confidence to take that risk?
A gut feeling, an analytical feeling that the world was ready to see Vietnam this way. Because no one had ever done a Vietnam movie from the point of the effect, the psychological effect it had. There were a lot of war movies about the physical effect. But the tagline of that movie was the first casualty of war is innocence. So the psychological effect, I thought no one had ever done. And yeah, I was a huge fan of the directors. But largely it was a gut instinct. It was just a gut instinct that I felt the time is ready, the world is ready. No one's ever seen this before. As I said, we'd done another movie with Oliver called Salvador, which I thought was great, even though it wasn't a box office hit. And so it was that instinct, yeah.
Are there some other risks that you write about in the book that you took that paid off or that you report on in the book?
Yeah, so Mortal Kombat is another one. I bet my job on that, and I left an incredibly great job to go make Mortal Kombat in spite of everyone telling me not to do it. And I continue to do it, and I'm at the point now where if I tell someone an idea and they say, hey, that's a brilliant idea, that's great, that's going to work, I get a little nervous. But if they say, you're crazy, I get a little calm, and the touch of the madness envelops me like a warm mist on the beach in the morning, and I feel right, and I go off to make the movie. I'm constantly doing that. When we decided several years ago, in addition to movies, we'd start a theme park business because fascinating technology, nexus of technology and entertainment, making theme park rides. So we had this idea to make a ride based on Star Trek, where you could, in stereoscopic 3D, walk into a Star Trek Borg. That's, if you're not a Star Trek fan, the Borg is other kind of space pods where these bad guys hang out. And in those days, at the beginning of the real resurgence in 3D, there were no moving 3D cameras. 3D cameras up until that point had all been stationary. No one had figured out how to make them move for technological reasons. But we had this great idea. So we had the idea, we pitched Paramount, they said yes, we got it. We didn't know how to do it yet. We then teamed up with another company and invented a camera, which thank goodness worked. And the whole ride worked and was a big success. And that became the start of the big craze of 3D. But we bet the whole thing on our ability to make a camera for something that we thought we could do, but we didn't know we could do. We do that all the time.
One of the things you also say is having fun at work is extremely important.
Yeah.
From my perspective, or I guess I would say, I can't think of as much a high profile, high pressure business as movie making. How do you incorporate fun into, or is my assumption wrong?
Here's the thing. So one of the Mortal Kombat movies was shot in these beautiful islands in southern Thailand. And we needed a shot in deep water on a kind of fast boat. And the only boat around was this gorgeous yacht from the Aman Hotel, not far away. And so as the good producer, I decided I will manage the yacht shoot. And so that means I and a portion of the crew spent 3 days on this gorgeous yacht in these islands. Now, we got the shot, and it works in the movie, and it was in the budget. And for a minute, you're thinking, wait a minute, how can I be in a yacht in the middle? I got to be working. And I thought, this is working, but why can't working be fun? And the reason it helps everybody is because then the crew realizes this is great. And then they work harder, and then your mind is more open-minded to creativity and new things because you're relaxed and you're playful. And so, yeah, movie making is very fun, but it's also very stressful because you're gambling a lot of money on one shot. In other words, a lot of times when business happens, you can test market something, you can slowly grow it, you can make 200 of them and then 400 and then 1,000. You can't on a movie. You make that $50, $100 million bet, you roll the dice on it. So there's a lot of stress in it, but the more fun you have with it and the more willing you're able to do that, the better you will analyze things and the better you'll do. It's counterintuitive, but it works.
I've never heard anyone put those two together.
Yeah, I actually challenge a lot of companies, like when I speak, to say, okay, what would you think would be a very fun thing to do? What do you want to do that's fun? What do you want to do that's fun at work that you've never done? Try it. Why not? Take your team out for frozen yogurt. Do something. Why not? And it works.
Let me ask you to maybe turn down the road or turn your head and look down the road a little bit, and where you see the new tools, AI, ChatGPT, around the creative process that you've used your career.
So I've been very fortunate in the nexus of entertainment and technology. Like I said, we did the first ever moving 3D shot. I made the first movie that extensively used morphing. I made the first movie from a video game. And I think what you have to look at technology, whether it's movies or something else, as a tool to enable what you want. So in that Star Trek example, we simply looked at technology as a tool because we wanted to see in 3D what it would look like to be inside the Borg cube, the bad guy's cube. So if you look at it that way, if you say, I want to make the Eiffel Tower, I better figure out how. Oh, they have these metal rods in Paris versus here's a bunch of metal rods. What am I going to do? You'll use technology correctly. And so there's a lot of misconceptions, I feel, around ChatGPT and new technology and everything else, but there's a lot of great stuff. So I think used correctly, it will become another tool that helps the movie business. There are things now you'll read about ChatGPT and AI where you'll say, we're afraid, says somebody, that soon filmmakers will use digital extras. We've been using digital extras for 20 years. So there's lots of things in movies that you might not quite see how it gets there. So I think it's great. It's like saying to a guy in the construction business, hey, here's some more tools in your toolbox, should you need them. So I think it's fabulous. And I think where the movie business is going is globalization. I think that if you look at this, the movie business as we in the West know it for 120 years has largely come from North America, Western Europe, South Korea, and Japan. So that's 90-something% of the revenues in the movie business. That's 20% of the world by population. So if you now say, wait a minute, that other 8%, which is over 5 billion people through technology now can see our movies, let's make movies we all can see and we all want to see at once. By incorporating all that, then all of a sudden you have a different world. And what enables us to do that is technology, because we make movies now by using crews that are digitally attached to each other in the cloud that work together. So we'll have a crew from India and Nepal and Taiwan and Western Europe and the United States all working together. And by the way, as an aside, I don't know the compliance world really well, but that is to me true diversity, because we're not hiring people because someone told us to. We're not hiring people based on what they look like. If we want to make movies from all around the world, we have to say to ourselves, we want the DNA of the global culture infused in the movie so everyone likes it. When we made Bobbleheads, the movie with Cher, their heads bobble. And Universal was very interested to make sure we get that right in animation. How are we going to do that? It turns out bobbleheads were invented in India in the 800s. And we had an Indian crew in the movie. So all of a sudden, culturally, they could participate in a way that was just a bonus. And we find that all the time. So I think that globalization is a great tool for getting new people involved in true diversity. And I think ChatGPT, all that stuff, they're just all good tools to bring the audience better stories.
So what's next for Larry?
So we're going to make a movie, an animated movie called The X Factor in the Jungle. So Simon Cowell's show, The X Factor, is one of the most successful shows in the world. It's in 178 countries. And in our animated movie, jungle animals find a karaoke machine and start their own version of the show. To the first time, the jungle will not solve disputes by violence, but by music. So that's the next movie.
So, Larry, I wanted to thank you for this podcast. It's been great. I've been talking to you, Larry Kasanoff, the author of A Touch of Madness. I can't wait to get a copy and read it. And I hope our listeners will do the same. So thank you again.
Thanks, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sunday Book Review Authors Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. The Sunday Book Review Authors Podcast is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.